Welcome to the lost village of Lodge. Today you would hardly know that Lodge had ever existed. All you can see is rubble and vegetation. Look around though, and you will spot the foundations of buildings, the remains of walls, and even an old cooking range, remnants of what was once a thriving small settlement, dating back to the medieval period and surviving right up until the 20th century. By the time Scar House Reservoir was begun in 1921, the population here had dwindled. And as Scar Village grew to house the reservoir workers, the hamlet here at Lodge ceased to exist. Lodge simply means a shelter. You'll notice the imposing stand of sycamore trees, which would have been planted as a windbreak in this exposed spot. In the 12th century, the original sycamores would have sheltered a medieval monastic farm set up by the monks of Byland Abbey, a Cistercian order who believed in a peaceful, simple life. The monks were granted land here by Roger de Mowbray, and they set up farms, granges and lodges all over Upper Nidderdale. You can't see any medieval remains today. The original structures would have been wooden or rough stone lodges with roofs made from ling, which is dried heather. The lodge was farmed by lay brothers. The brothers weren't full-blown monks, but they wore rough tunics and were expected to keep to the routine of prayer and silence. In the 16th century, with the dissolution of the monasteries, abbey lands were taken over by the crown and sold off. But day-to-day life here at Lodge, tending the livestock while battling the elements, was to continue much the same for centuries. By the end of the 19th century, the influx of workers into the mill towns meant that Bradford Corporation needed a supply of fresh water. They aimed to pipe it from Nidderdale. From 1904, Bradford Corporation began buying out farm leases in the Scar House Reservoir watershed and asking the residents to leave. By this time, only sheep grazing and a few cattle remained at Lodge. Angram Reservoir was completed in 1919, drowning the hamlets of Angram and Westhouses. Scar House Reservoir was begun here in 1921 to submerge both Hayden Car and a temporary reservoir built in 1894 to control the water flow. As Lodge was being abandoned, an influx of reservoir construction workers and their families were moving into Scar Village. By 1928-9, most of the villagers at Lodge had gone. That winter was particularly harsh. One resident reported that it was so cold when he went to bed he couldn't blow the candle out because the flame was froze. No surprise then that the last inhabitants left Lodge when their lease was up in 1929. In 2016, archaeological excavations were carried out here as part of a community dig. The results help us to understand the remains of the village, fleshing out what we know from old documents and photographs. There were 3 building complexes south of the path on the current reservoir side, and 2 complexes on the north of the track. The main buildings followed the longhouse tradition, the east end for living quarters and the west end for animals, all under the same roof. Medieval pottery shards were uncovered, probably from jugs or other vessels, which recall the working lives of the lay brothers of the medieval farmsteads. Decorative stone window frames from the 17th century were found, thought to be recycled from an earlier building on the site. Fragments of pottery were discovered, including bowls and preserve jars, giving a glimpse into domestic life from the 18th century onwards. In fact, one preserve jar bore a label dating it to the 1920s, just before the last villagers left. Fragments of clay pipes were also uncovered, including a more ornate example with a skull and crossbones depicted. A metal pocket watch was also found in a sorry state. The abandoned iron bread ovens date from 1904 onwards, when Bradford Corporation took over the village. All of these tangible remains give us a glimpse of everyday life in the lost village of Lodge.